A father stands outside a modest home in Medina. Inside, his two sons are preparing to leave. Not for a journey, not for war. He watches in silence. He raised them, protected them, loved them, and now he believes they are making the greatest mistake of their lives. Every instinct tells him to stop them, to argue, to persuade, to do whatever it takes. After all, if someone you love is walking toward what you believe is disaster, that question follows him through the streets of Medina, past merchants lifting their shutters, past children racing through narrow alleys, past neighbors beginning another ordinary morning. His question is painfully simple. Should I force them? For a brief moment, put yourself in his place. What answer would you expect? Many people believe they already know. After everything they've heard about Islam, after the headlines, the debates, the endless arguments online, the answer seems obvious. But history preserves a very different response. A single verse was revealed, only a few words long, most debated, and most misunderstood verses in the entire Quran. But before we hear those words, we need to understand the world that gave birth to them. Because words never exist in isolation. They belong to people, to places, to moments in history. So let's step back nearly 14 centuries, not to attack one, but to investigate it, like historians following evidence. Because by the end of this journey, you'll have enough context to decide for yourself what this verse was really saying, and why so many people still misunderstand it today. To understand why this question mattered so much, we have to understand Medina. 14 centuries ago, Medina was not a city where everyone thought the same way. It was a place where different communities lived side by side. Muslims who had left their homes in Mecca, Jewish tribes with generations of history in Arabia, Arab families who continued following the traditions of their ancestors, merchants, travelers, people with different beliefs, different backgrounds, and different hopes for the future. They did not live in separate worlds. They shared streets. They traded with one another. They formed alliances. Sometimes, they even shared family connections. Now imagine living in a place like that. Imagine sitting at a table where everyone cares about each other, but not everyone sees the world in the same way. One person believes they have found the truth. Another person is uncertain. Another person follows a different path entirely. And then comes the question every society eventually faces. How do you live with people who have the freedom to choose differently? This was not just a philosophical debate. For the early Muslim community, it was a real challenge. As Islam spread in Medina, some people accepted the message. Others did not. Some embraced it immediately. Some questioned it. Some rejected it completely. And that created a question with consequences far beyond one family. If someone refuses to believe what you believe, what are you allowed to do? Can conviction justify control? Can someone truly have faith if that faith is created through pressure? These questions became especially important because the Quran did not present belief as something that could simply be produced by force. It repeatedly called people to think, to reflect, to examine signs, to use reason. A forced decision may create outward obedience, but can it create genuine belief? That was the deeper issue behind the father's question. He wasn't only asking about his sons. He was facing a question that every generation has faced, and controlling them. But before we reach that verse, there is an important misunderstanding we need to uncover. Because for centuries, people have often approached this verse in exactly the wrong way. For centuries, this verse has been pulled into arguments. One person quotes a single sentence, and very quickly, a conversation about meaning turns into a battle of quotations. But there is something important that often gets forgotten. The people who first heard the Quran did not experience it as a collection of isolated sentences. They did not receive verses as disconnected statements appearing one after another on a screen. They lived through the events. They knew the questions being asked. They knew the struggles people were facing. They understood that certain words were revealed at certain moments, for specific situations. That historical setting was not an extra detail. It was part of the meaning itself. Imagine discovering one sentence from someone's diary. It says, "I had no choice." At first glance, those words seem clear. But what do they actually mean? Were they trapped? Were they protecting someone? Were they making a painful sacrifice? Were they escaping danger? The sentence itself has not changed, but the story around it completely changes how you understand it. Ancient texts work the same way. A sentence does not exist alone. It belongs to a conversation, a moment, a question, a human experience. And this verse belongs to one of the Quran's deepest conversations, the relationship between truth and freedom. It does not say that every idea is automatically correct. Instead, it repeatedly challenges people to think, to question, to observe, to reflect, to search for truth with an open mind. But that creates a fascinating question. If the Quran presents its message as the truth, why would it also say that no one should be forced to accept it? At first, that seems almost contradictory. If you believe something is important, wouldn't you want everyone to accept it? But perhaps that question reveals something deeper. Perhaps the Quran is making a distinction that is easy to miss. There is a difference between convincing someone and controlling them, and an order. And there is a difference between a belief chosen freely and a belief produced by pressure. But before we explore the verse that answers this question, because many people connect this idea with another subject entirely, then what about the verses that talk about fighting? This is where many discussions become confused, because two completely different subjects are often placed together as if they are the same: belief and conflict. But they are not the same question. Imagine reading a history book about the Second World War. You find pages describing armies, battles, weapons, military decisions. Would you conclude that the entire book is encouraging war? Of course not. You would understand that those pages are describing a specific historical situation, a conflict, a time, a set of circumstances. The same principle applies when studying the Quran. The Quran was not revealed as one single speech delivered in one moment. Its verses came over more than 20 years. They responded to real questions, real events, real challenges faced by a growing community. Some verses addressed personal character. Some addressed family life. Some addressed justice. Some addressed conflict and survival. The important question is not simply, does the Quran mention fighting? It does. The more important question is, why is fighting mentioned? With what limits? And what happens when the conflict ends? A battlefield and a person's heart are two different places. A battle can decide who controls a city. It can decide whether a community survives, but it cannot create genuine belief. A person can be forced to speak certain words. They can be pressured into acting a certain way. They can even pretend to accept something. But can anyone force another person's heart to truly believe? That is the distinction the Quran repeatedly draws. Physical conflict deals with physical threats. Faith deals with the inner choice of a human being. Confusing these two ideas creates a misunderstanding that has lasted for centuries. A command related to war is transformed into a command about belief. A historical situation is turned into a universal rule. And a question about protecting a community becomes a question about controlling hearts. But once we separate these two ideas, the picture begins to change. And now we can finally return to the words that started this entire journey. The verse that answered the Father's question. There is no compulsion in religion. There is no compulsion in religion. 7 words. Simple enough to remember. But like many powerful ideas, its simplicity hides a deeper question. What does it actually mean? Does it mean that beliefs do not matter? No. Does it mean that every path is automatically the same? No. Does it mean that people should stop searching for truth? No. The verse is making a different point. It is drawing a line between accepting a message and being forced to accept it. Because the moment belief is created through force, something important disappears. Choice. Think about the decisions that matter most in your own life. A friendship, a promise, a purpose, a relationship. If someone forced you to make those choices, would they carry the same meaning? Probably not. The action might look the same from the outside, but something essential would be missing: the willingness behind it. The Quran presents faith in a similar way. It repeatedly invites people to reflect, to ask questions, to consider evidence, to look at the world around them. An invitation only has meaning when the person receiving it is free to accept or refuse. Otherwise, it is no longer an invitation. It becomes a command, and a command can control behavior, but it cannot transform the heart. Now return to the father we met at the beginning, standing in Medina, watching his sons choose a path he believed was wrong. His love for them did not disappear. His disagreement did not disappear. His concern did not disappear. But the answer he received revealed something deeper. Even when you believe you have found the truth, you cannot create genuine faith by force. Because faith that is forced from the outside is not the same as faith chosen from within. And this idea was not only a private lesson for one family. It was a principle that would shape how the Quran spoke about belief itself. But there is still one final question. If this principle is so clear, why has this verse been misunderstood for so long? Why do people continue to debate its meaning 14 centuries later? The answer takes us beyond the verse itself and into the way human beings read history. Why has this verse been misunderstood for so long? Part of the answer is something that happens with almost every ancient text. People remove words from the world that gave them meaning. A sentence is separated from the conversation around it. A moment in history is separated from the events that created it. And suddenly, something that was once clear becomes confusing. Imagine hearing the final sentence of an argument between two people. Without knowing what happened before, you might completely misunderstand who was right. You might judge one person unfairly, not because the words were false, but because the story was incomplete. Context does not change the words. It reveals what the words were actually saying. This is why understanding any historical document requires more than simply reading the sentence. It requires asking, who was speaking? Who was listening? What problem was being addressed? What was happening at that moment? The Quran is no different. It was revealed over more than 2 decades. It met people in different situations. It answered different questions. It guided a community through moments of peace, hardship, disagreement, and uncertainty. To read every verse as if it appeared in a vacuum is to remove the very circumstances that explain why it was revealed. And this is where the verse becomes even more interesting. Because there is no compulsion in religion is not only a statement about what people should do. It is also a statement about what faith actually is. If someone accepts an idea only because they are afraid, have they truly accepted it? If someone says the right words, but their heart rejects them, has genuine belief been created? The verse challenges the assumption that outward obedience and inner conviction are the same thing. They are not. A person can control another person's actions, but no person can truly control another person's heart. And perhaps that is why this short verse has remained so powerful. Because it asks a question that is not limited to one century, one culture, or one religion. It asks something every human society must eventually face. Can something still be called faith if it cannot be freely chosen? History shows us that human beings have always struggled with this question. The desire to share what we believe is natural. People want others to understand what they have discovered. They want to protect what they consider valuable. But history also shows us the danger that appears when persuasion turns into control, when an idea is no longer offered, but imposed. When a person is no longer seen as someone who can think and choose, but only as someone who must obey. The verse we explored today presents a different vision of faith, a vision where belief begins with awareness, with reflection, with a choice made by a conscious human being. It does not say that truth does not matter. It says that truth cannot be created through force, because a person can be pressured into silence, but they cannot be pressured into sincerity. They can be made to repeat words, but they cannot be forced to truly believe them. And perhaps that is the deeper message behind these 7 words. There is no compulsion in religion. Not that every belief is the same. Not that questions do not matter. Not that searching for truth is unnecessary. But that a meaningful relationship with God must involve the most human thing we possess, the ability to choose. So now, when we return to that father standing in Medina, the answer becomes clearer. He was not being told that his love was wrong. He was not being told that truth was unimportant. He was being shown a deeper principle. Guidance can be offered. Wisdom can be shared. Questions can be answered. But the final choice belongs to the person. Because a heart that is forced may obey, but a heart that chooses can truly believe. And perhaps this is why this verse continues to be remembered more than 14 centuries later. Not because it is the longest verse in the Quran, not because it is the easiest verse to understand, but because it asks a question that every generation must answer. Can faith have any meaning if it is no longer a choice? Whether you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, or simply someone searching for answers. Understanding a text requires more than hearing a quote. It requires patience, curiosity, and a willingness to look at the whole story. Because sometimes the most misunderstood words are not misunderstood because they are hidden, but because they are separated from the story that gives them meaning. If you enjoyed this journey into the history, language, and context behind the Quran, consider subscribing. In each episode, we explore verses and ideas that are often quoted, but rarely understood in their full context. Thank you for watching. Keep questioning, keep learning, and always search for the complete story. And ultimately, Allah knows best.